One of the main objectives of the Russian army and Russian government in Ukraine is demilitarization of Ukraine. How do you see what size of army would Russia accept to agree on in Ukraine?
Russia's
Because
already said
you
50,
remember
50 to 60,000. That's it. There won't be any more than that.
the same that it was in Istanbul, in that
Yeah,
agreement in Istanbul.
that's it. There will be nothing more. Russia won't accept it. Ukraine had a 260,000 strong military trained by NATO at the beginning of this conflict that was prepared to invade the Donbass and slaughter the Russian speakers of the Donbass. That's 260,000 NATO trained. That army won't be allowed to exist. Now, Ukraine has this fantasy of 600 to 800,000 troops. First of all, they don't have them. But even if they did, Russia won't allow it. To the victor go the spoils. If you want an 800,000 man army, you have to win the war. Ukraine has lost the war. And we're going to see the rapid disintegration of the Ukrainian military very soon. I mean, desertions are at all-time high, and you're going to see units now. Because to give you an example, what's happening? There's a town name begins with an M. I can't pronounce it. Minovgrad or something of that nature. There's two brigades. I think it's the 25th Brigade and the 38th Marine Brigade. Two of Ukraine's elite fighting forces. They're surrounded. And they've been, there should be about 10,000 guys, but I just told you they don't have any strength anymore. So each of these brigades is down to about 500 men each. That's 1,000 men total. These are the best troops in Ukraine. And they want to be allowed to break out. They believe if they concentrated their strength, they could break out, and most of these guys could walk home alive. Right now, they're starving. They can only be supplied by drones. The drones either come in with the big Baba Yagi or whatever drones come in and drop supplies, or they come in on unmanned vehicles down. But the Russians have direct line of sight control of lines of communications. They're shooting down the drones, blowing up the unmanned vehicles. So these guys are starving. No wounded are being evacuated. They're left to die in the basement. That's one of the things that came out of Pokrovsk, is the Russians went through the basements, and the basements were just full of dead guys because the Ukrainian army didn't allow the wounded to be evacuated, didn't have any ability to evacuate them. So they died. And that's what's happening to these wounded. If you get wounded in this fight, you're dead. You're not getting out. The other guys are saying, you got to let us break out. And Zelensky apparently just last night said, no, stay there, fight and die. That's it. If you're going to allow your two best brigades to fight and die, as you see on the battlefield right now, all across the battlefield, there's little mini pockets taking place as the Russians outflank and begin to surround these units. These units aren't, they're looking there saying, government doesn't care about us. What are we fighting for? Why are we dying? And you're seeing the whole army is beginning to lose the will to fight, the will to resist. They no longer believe in the cause. And as that happens, they begin to leave their positions in order to save their lives, or just desert, just leave forever. And this is collapse. This is what's happening right now. The Ukrainian army will cease to exist as a functioning fighting force in the very near future. Of any meaningful size. And at the end, what's going to happen is the demilitarization will be as Russia has dictated. Russia will allow a select few, none of your Azov dudes, none of your Kraken dudes, none of these true Banderas believers, but territorial soldiers who weren't corrupted, who didn't get NATO training. I don't think there's going to be any role for anybody with NATO training. 50 to 60,000 people, lightly armed for, securing the border and, basically, limited self-defense. But the idea of Ukraine having a military that can stand toe-to-toe with Russia, nope, ain't going to happen. And there's not going to be Ukrainian military that's going to be the European army. That's what Zelensky wants. 600,000 strong Ukrainian, mercenary force for Europe. Nope, that's not going to happen either. There will be this is demilitarization, and this is what's going to happen.
How do you see the case of corruption? Because after all, I think the corruption would be the key in Ukraine in terms of, and not only corruption, the other point that was mentioned in that 28-point document was the amnesty, given to these war criminals. Don't you think that these two can be used in the aftermath of any settlement in Ukraine in order to remove these ultra-nationalists from power?
Remember this 28-point plan isn't really a 28-point plan. It's nothing. Um, there's certain points that are indicators on the strategic direction, but the other points are just put in there just to say we covered that base. And I think amnesty is one of those. Again, I think it falls in the line of what happened last June, where Vladimir Putin said we can accept the Istanbul communique updated to represent present reality. Would have been a good deal for Ukraine, but now they opted out, so now they're going down. To bring about a peace here, there's talk of amnesty. It's sort of a bone. What's my future going to be? Okay, so the war ends. Man, we did some pretty bad stuff. Where they're talking about demilitarization, denazification, corruption. The idea is nope, blanket amnesty. You're all clean. Walk away. That deal is not going to be on the table for long. And when that goes away, the Ukrainians who are corrupt, because remember, the goal of Russia right now is to the political transformation of Ukraine. That means that traditional, power elite structures like the oligarchs and all of the corrupt families, all of the corrupt relationships, they're going to be disintegrated. They're not going to be allowed to stay in place because from that comes the political powers that become the Rada. The Rada is just a tool of corruption. You elect people to a political party, they come in and they divvy up the Ukrainian economy into their pockets. That's what they do. The future of Ukraine cannot be that way. And so Russia will dismantle that, put in their own structures. Whether you want to say those are any less corrupt or whatever, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to be. And I'm not saying that the Russians are incapable of corruption. What I am saying, though, is that whatever exists in the future will be designed to create a political structure that strengthens Russian domination of post-war Ukraine. And in order to do that, you have to disintegrate the current structures. And so, Russia, you can't do that if you give everybody amnesty. So I think, Russia will, and the denazification is another one. People need to understand that horrific crimes have been committed, not by the Russians, but by the Ukrainians, horrific crimes. We don't know the truth of what happened in Kursk. I know a little bit of the truth because I've talked, but, these Ukrainian Nazis went into Kursk in these villages along the border. The young were able to evacuate. The elderly stayed behind, and they were butchered and raped. And I'm not just throwing out words. Butchered, literally hacked to death and raped by Ukrainian Nazis. People who wore Nazi helmets, had the SS thing and all that. And the Russians know who these people are. They're not going to be allowed to live. I mean, I'm not condoning war crimes. I'm just telling you right now, they will not be allowed to live. You're not going to see these people captured. And in the post-conflict, they won't be allowed to reside in Ukraine. They will have to seek, safe haven elsewhere. And I think they need to be careful because the part of the normalization of Russia, and I'll get to that in a second, will be Russia will say if you have a war criminal under your jurisdiction, you need to repatriate them to Russia for justice. So I don't think there's going to be too many places where these people can hide. Normalization, a key aspect of all this. People say, well, why isn't Putin going for the kill? I mean, your good friend Gilbert Doctorow, he's a big fan of the decapitation thing. Old Gil knows war. No, he doesn't. But that's okay. He sold brandy and whiskey and wine. Good man. But he wants to decapitate Kiev. And why isn't that? It shows Putin's weak. No, it shows Putin's about 400 times smarter than Gilbert Doctorow ever will be. Because at some point in time, when this war ends, you can end the war. Let's say old Gil got a hold of Putin and Putin said, okay, we're going to decapitate. But kill Zelensky. That's going to make Europe really want to do business with you, make the United States want to do business with you, right? And we're going to go into Odessa because, God damn it, we can. We're Russia. We're going to do everything. Odessa, Kharkov, take it all. And Europe's going to go, see, we warned you about the Russians, aggressive. And there may be a peace. Russia can win the war. But then what happens to the sanctions? They won't be lifted. What happens to the recognition of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Lugansk, and Donetsk? They won't be recognized. They'll become little, like the Baltic states were, at the end of World War II, where we had the map of the Soviet Union, but then we said Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia aren't part of the Soviet Union. We don't recognize that. And so the map would show that Crimea and the 4 Novorossiya oblasts aren't part of Russia. And it creates the possibility for forever war, which is, of course, the last thing Vladimir Putin wants. So because Vladimir Putin is 400,000 times smarter than Gilbert Doctorow, he's not going to go with decapitation. What he's going to go for is the kind of peace deal that he's pressuring to get right now, a peace deal that has the West recognize Russia's legal authority over the 4 territories and Crimea. So there won't be messed up maps, and sanctions will be lifted. And Russia will have the ability not only to recover hundreds of billions of dollars of seized assets, but engage in economic activity with the West unencumbered by sanctions that'll bring in trillions of dollars of economic benefit. The genius of Vladimir Putin. This is what people need to see right now, is that Russia's playing the long game. And the long game doesn't involve feel-good moments of raising the flag over Odessa. They're going to get Odessa, but it's going to be done through a referendum. They're not going to physically occupy Odessa because that creates conditions where it becomes difficult for Europe and the United States to accept, Russian sovereignty over these territories. Russia behaves responsibly, behaves within the limits that itself has set. And then as Russia gains political control over Ukraine, if there's a need for referendum, there is. But what happens if Ukraine, instead of being a hostile state that Russia has to strip away territories, Ukraine instead becomes the third sister, part of the Union state, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. There's a whole element working. Again, the ignorant people of the world, Gilbert Doctorow, they're unaware of this, you see, because to talk about the Union state means that you actually have to go talk to the Union state, and that makes you somehow a tool of Russia to actually speak with people who know what they're doing and are doing real things. You become a tool of Russia when you do this. No, you become somebody empowered with knowledge and information, and you know that there is right now within Russia and Belarus a major effort to bring Ukraine in as the third sister of the Union state. And that's the strategic goal and objective of many people in Russia, I believe, including Vladimir Putin, although I'm loath to speak on his behalf. But it's a politically sensitive issue. But this is the direction that the Russians are going, with a bigger picture about long-term stability to resolve the root causes of the conflict. If you go in and decapitate and all that, all you do is continue the root causes of the conflict. Russia wants that over. And Donald Trump appears to be willing to facilitate this so that it's truly over. When this war ends, it's over, finished, done.
What's so amazing about Europe? They're talking about that Russia wants to attack us. Then they say we have to go with a preemptive attack, hybrid attack on Russia. This is the first time I see Vladimir Putin coming out and saying something that we haven't heard from him since the war in Ukraine started. We've heard, these sort of reactions from Medvedev, but I have never heard Vladimir Putin responding the way that he's responding to European in this video clip. Scott
said that 100 times. We have no plans of fighting against Europe. But if Europe wants to fight and they start this fight, then we are ready right now. There is no doubt about this. But the only question is, if Europe starts the war, unleashes this war, because that's not Ukraine. With Ukraine, we use some surgical means. We are trying to be really careful. Because you understand why. This is not a war in the direct sense of the word. And Europe, all of a sudden, wants to start a war, and if it does start a war, then very rapidly there might be a situation where we have no one to negotiate with.
Have you ever heard Vladimir Putin talking this way?
Yeah, at the beginning. He put the record down. He said, we are going to resolve this Ukrainian situation, and if NATO gets involved, all of our resources will be available. But now we are 4 years later. I think Putin's just fed up with the stupidity of Europe. I mean, how stupid can they be? You've heard this. Putin treated the Europeans with a modicum of respect. He used to take phone calls from, Macron and Merkel, and listen to them and consider what they had to say. But now you just look at the stupidity of Europe. I mean, just this nonsense. As Putin said, I think earlier in that, they seek to strategically defeat us. Okay, you want to play that game? Then, yeah. And what basically Russia's saying is, you want a war with us, there will be a war, but understand there will be nothing left when we finish. Nothing. Now, whether or not Russia uses nuclear weapons is another question. But the fact is, Russia has considerable strategic conventional strike capabilities. There won't be precision guided. He will totally devastate the industry of Germany, will cease to exist. France, if they want to play stupid games, they'll win stupid prizes. The same thing with Great Britain. There is no defense in all of Europe. They've stripped themselves bare and sent it all to Ukraine, where it's just been destroyed by the Russians. I don't know. Did you hear Rubio the other day? We give them patriots, and then a few days later, they're destroyed. Welcome to the real world. Russia has got it all figured out. There's no air defense left in Germany. So remember that factory outside of Kazan. That's I think they were talking about 500 drones a day. I think it's up to 1,000 drones a day. Russia is using 400, 500 drones a day. Some cases, sometimes down to 200, 300, but they're producing 1,000. Where do you think those drones are? You understand what I just said, that the day Europe wants a war, the skies over Europe will be blackened with Russian drones, and they will blow everything up. Oreshnik will come down and blow everything up. There's a whole new category of Iskander, the Iskander S, which is now an intermediate range missile. It will blow things up with a conventional warhead. Indications are the Russians may have extended the range of the 9M729 cruise missile, which was, originally compliant with the INF treaty, but now that there is no INF treaty, may suddenly have gotten 1,200 kilometer range, which means these cruise missiles will strike targets everywhere in Europe. There will be no square inch of Europe safe from Russia's overwhelming conventional strike, and Europe has no defense. None. Zero. There's no defense in Europe to any of this. And that's the reality. And then if France and England want to do something stupid, like you could use a nuclear weapon, then all of Europe disappears instantaneously. Now, that may lead to a trigger a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. May not. Because, the fundamental question that always has to be answered is, will an American president trade Boston for Poznan? Now, Poznan's a Polish city. I'm just picking it out of nowhere. I'm not saying the Russians have a particular hard on against that city. But the point is, if Russia decides to nuke a Polish city, is the United States willing to lose a major American city as a result? Or, as the president has been pointing out to Europe, you're doing this to yourselves. You're stupid. You're ignorant. You're dumb. If Europe wants to commit suicide, is the United States automatically required to commit suicide with them? And I think Russia now has a better understanding of where this current administration is, and may even have some insights that, haven't been publicly discussed. But, whereas Joe Biden talked about, the sacred duty of Article 5, it's a sacred bond. It's not a sacred bond. You want to commit suicide, commit suicide. But America's not obligated to join you in your suicide pact. And right now, you have this head of the military committee of NATO talking about a preemptive strike against Russia. First of all, it's a joke. There can be no preemptive strike. I just want to educate people. For us to carry out the opening strike against Iraq in 1991, we had to put together something called the guerrilla package. I mean, it's a big old package of aircraft, hundreds of aircraft that had to be the planning that went into it and everything. NATO doesn't have that. You take America out of it, and we're not going to preemptively strike Russia. You get NATO to suddenly come in. They can't do it. They can't. It physically can't do it. NATO air forces don't have the ability. First of all, some Italian idiot voices off, but listen to what he said. We don't know how we could do this preemptive strike because we don't know who would do it and who would be authorized to do it, on what authority would do it. There's a whole bunch of legal issues, which means it can't be done. It can't be done. So it's stupid. Cyber. There's only in all of Europe, there's one cyber superpower, and that's America. Then there's a wannabe called GCHQ in England, and then the Dutch have a small capability. But everybody else, it's a joke. Russia's infiltrated them. Russia owns them. They can't do cyber warfare. You take away the United States, and you take away the ability to meaningfully do cyber warfare against Russia. So they're not going to do a preemptive strike against that. They're talking about some of this hybrid warfare kind of stuff. Well, you see the British doing that right now. The British have been practicing hybrid warfare. Who do you think did the drone attack against the Russian bases? The Ukrainians? It was a British plan, British run with a Ukrainian footprint. Who do you think's doing these underwater drone attacks against Russian shadow fleet? The Ukrainians? No, it's the SBS, the Special Boat Service, and MI6. The British have been doing this all along. They already are doing preemptive hybrid attacks, and the Russians know this. The Russians know this. Putin spoke because I think he was just frustrated and angry about this. I think he just had basically had enough of stupidity. It's like, anybody would when you just see somebody behaving stupid. At some point in time, you just snap and say, look, I'll blow up your house if you want to do this. But the fact is, NATO can do nothing, literally nothing. And the Russians know this, but they're prepared. I just ask people to do the basic math. If you're producing, 1,000 drones a day, and you're only using at max 550, where's the other 450 go a day? They've been producing these now for several months. Please understand, Russia has 100,000 drones minimum that can darken the skies of Europe anytime Russia wants it to. And there's not a damn thing Europe can do about it. They don't have any air defense, nothing. So that's why I think Putin's pretty confident that if you want to play this game, Russia's ready to play right now, he said. Notice he didn't say we have to mobilize, we have to do anything. Right now. Because it's not going to be the war that you think it's going to be. It's literally going to be 30,000 drones going into Europe, a day for a week. That's 210,000 drones. There is no defense, so nothing's going to shoot them down. I can pick 210,000 points of impact and wipe Europe off the face of the earth. So this is the kind of stupidity that NATO is dealing with right now. And this is the kind of stupidity the United States just is avoiding. That's why we're not talking to them. Because what's there to talk to? These are morons. Kalia Kallas says, nothing she says makes sense. Literally. Macron, nothing he says makes sense. Nothing any European says makes sense. Even the head of this military committee, he doesn't make sense. The Europeans are just there being nonsensical, doubling down on stupid. And the Russians, the United States are just going, ignore them. And now, like spoiled children, they're pounding the table even harder, trying to be heard. At some point in time, Europe will wake up and realize that they've cut themselves out, that they have no influence, and that things are going to happen. They're going to have a profound impact on Europe. I mean, I love it. They're so proud because now they passed a law that says we will never use Russian gas and oil. Good luck. But you are, and you will, and you're just stupid.
You have been.
You have been, and you always will be. So Europe's just nullified itself. It's not a serious actor anymore.